I just feel like I've learned what really makes me happy.
Morgan Wallen has an army of country music fans who really look up to him.
I definitely want him. I'd take him everywhere.
The most important performance of his life is being a good role model for just one person, his son. But is Morgan actually doing a good job as a father? And what's his relationship with his baby mama? Morgan's journey to being a father wasn't always an easy one, and it almost took some awful turns. In July 2020, Morgan took to social media to share some incredibly joyous news with his fans. He announced that he was a new father to a beautiful boy, Indigo Wilder. Indigo's mother is Morgan's ex-fiance, KT Smith. The couple were previously engaged for 3 years before they finally decided to break up in 2019. But obviously, as this baby proves, they still managed to see each other for a little alone time despite no longer officially being a couple. KT also shared the news on social media, writing that Indigo, who she referred to as Indy, was the answer to all of Mama's prayers. She also said that he was the cutest little human ham hunk that she had ever seen with her own eyes. Despite the fact that they weren't together anymore, KT and Morgan were still committed to being co-parents. Although that could sometimes be easier said than done. In fact, when Morgan first realized just how much his life was going to change, he had a hard time accepting it. Morgan said that this wasn't the way he pictured parenthood working out for him. He wanted to have a family, just like his parents and the one he grew up in, but that wasn't going to happen anymore. His parents are a couple that has stood the test of time and they're still together. So he was raised with two parents who were happily together. To Morgan, that was always the picture of a perfect family and what he was hoping to have for himself. But fate had other plans for him. Morgan struggled with accepting that when he first got the news. It's never easy when things don't go the way you expect. But despite those initial cold feet, by the time Indy was in his arms, Morgan had come around. Morgan went on social media to write an extremely thoughtful and emotional response to meeting Indy for the first time. He said that right away, this baby changed him into a new man. Morgan claimed that after Indy came into the world, he immediately saw his own world in a different way. Morgan used to feel like it was just him alone, but that was no longer the case. Morgan had just been through a year of crazy professional and personal controversy, from being recorded using slurs to various other antics that put him on the verge of being canceled. He'd been through a lot, but as soon as he met Indy, he realized he'd no longer remember the year for those sad reasons. Instead, this was going to be the year that he met his son and turned everything around. Morgan wrote that Indy was a gift, almost like a reward at the end of an incredibly difficult time in his life. He vowed to be the father that Indy deserves, and he said that he would also step up to be the kind of co-parent that KT deserves. When you become a father, you have to start thinking about more than just yourself, and you need to really understand how your decisions have consequences. Morgan had been living a relatively consequence-free life up until this point, regardless of how extreme some of his actions were. But Indy changed all that. Morgan promised to always protect Indy and to be an example of a good man for him, just like Morgan's father was for him. Morgan wrote that he knows every decision he makes will impact his child, so he needs to make all those decisions with Indy in mind. He said that he was understandably a little scared about what being a dad would feel like, but he added that meeting his son was the coolest feeling in the world. And above all else, Morgan was just happy that his son was born healthy and happy. He also wrote that he couldn't wait to see Indy catch his first big fish, although he might have to wait just a bit for that one. Despite the fact that Morgan wasn't raising Indy in exactly the kind of home he grew up in, he was still appreciative that KT was the person he'd be on the co-parenting journey with. Morgan still cares about KT and is thankful to share his son with a person she still has feelings for, even if there's not enough there for a committed relationship. They're both doing their best to navigate a difficult situation that doesn't have an instruction manual. They acknowledge that they're not the first pair of people to deal with this situation, but just because someone else has done it doesn't make it any easier, and it really hasn't all been smooth sailing. Morgan has acknowledged that he and KT experienced some stressful times during the early days of co-parenting, but thankfully that seems to mostly be behind them, and some of that is due to a little help Morgan received from two of his biggest fans, specifically Morgan's parents, Tommy and Leslie, who traveled from Tennessee to help take care of their grandson. Morgan knows he's still learning and isn't an expert, but he's doing everything he can to learn from his role models. And he's not shying away from being a dad. If you walk into Morgan's house, it's very clear that a baby lives there with him, even if it's only part-time. Morgan made a promise to his son when he was born that he'd always make decisions with him in mind. But a few months later, it seemed like he forgot all about those words. Just months after Indy was born, Morgan was kicked off the Saturday Night Live lineup after videos surfaced showing that he was breaking their COVID protocols. This was still at the peak of the pandemic before any vaccines. Then he was filmed kissing a group of young ladies while he was at the University of Alabama for a weekend. It was a whirlwind that shows some very easy traps that a young star can fall into, and how quickly the public's opinion can sway with some embarrassing videos. It also didn't seem like he made any of those decisions with Indy in mind. Morgan later reflected on this, realizing he wouldn't be too proud to show his son those videos. It occurred to Morgan that he had to really start thinking about things differently, something he said he'd do when Indy was born, but clearly it was taking a little more time. Still, Morgan has high hopes for himself as a father, especially as Indy learns to talk and starts asking the famous singer some tough questions. Morgan simply hopes that he can give his son the same sound advice he was fortunate enough to receive as a child from his parents, and that his son can always look to him as a friend and more than just a parent. He always wants to be there to help Indy and always wants to do the best he can as a parent and a man. and in the event he ever falls short, he's hopeful that he can learn from it. Morgan knows that touring life will certainly pull him away from his parental duties, but he still vows to be as much a part of Indy's life as his schedule allows. Morgan is still very much on a journey of growing into the man he can become, just like his son. He's made plenty of mistakes along the way, but he seems to be determined to learn from those mistakes. Hopefully, he can always be there for his son and make good on the promises he made when Indy was born. But anyways, what do you guys think about all this? Is co-parenting with your ex ever easy? Will Morgan be a good dad as Indy becomes a rebellious teenager? Let me know in the comments below.